The sound of the slap cracked through the cafe like a gunshot, sharp and sudden, the kind of noise that makes every conversation die mid-sentence. And for half a second no one breathed as a grown man stood frozen beside a small table, his cheek burning red, his coffee spilling across the floor, while his little daughter stared up at him with wide, confused eyes, not understanding why a stranger's hand had just struck her father in public. The bully laughed first, a loud, ugly sound, as if he'd just proven something important to himself. And he sneered down at the man he'd hit, completely unaware that the quiet single dad in front of him had once led men into places most people only see in nightmares. The cafe had been warm and gentle just moments earlier, filled with the low hum of morning life, spoons clinking against porcelain, the hiss of steamed milk, the comforting smell of fresh bread and roasted beans, and the single dad had chosen it carefully, because it was one of the few places where his daughter felt safe enough to smile. He sat near the window, her small legs swinging under the table as she told him a long, serious story about her school project, her hands moving dramatically in the air. And he listened with the full attention of someone who knew how fragile these moments were, how easily they could be taken away. His name was Daniel Carter, though no one here knew it. And to the world he was just another tired father in worn jeans and a faded jacket, his eyes carrying a weight that suggested too many sleepless nights, too many memories he never spoke about. The bully noticed them because bullies always notice vulnerability, or what they think is vulnerability. He was big, loud, expensive looking. The kind of man who wore confidence like armor and cruelty like a hobby. And when he brushed past Daniel's chair, he deliberately kicked the leg of the table, sloshing coffee dangerously close to the child. Daniel reacted instantly, not with anger, but with instinctive protection. Pulling the cup away and placing his hand between the hot liquid and his daughter, his voice calm as he said, "Hey, careful, there's a kid here." It wasn't a challenge, just a request, gentle and respectful. But to a man like the bully, respect from someone he assumed was weaker felt like an insult. "What did you say to me?" the bully snapped, turning back with a smirk that said he'd been waiting all morning for someone to give him a reason. The cafe went quieter, eyes lifting over cups, tension creeping into the air, and Daniel felt that old familiar tightening in his chest, the one he'd spent years learning to control. He stood slowly, positioning himself fully between the bully and his daughter, his hands open, his voice steady. "I said there's a child here. No need to make a problem." Inside his head, another voice whispered, the one he never completely silenced, the one that cataloged exits, measured distances, assessed threats, but he pushed it down because he wasn't that man anymore. Not here. The bully laughed again, louder this time, leaning in close enough that Daniel could smell alcohol under expensive cologne. "You gonna tell me what to do?" he mocked, eyes flicking dismissively over Daniel's worn clothes, his tired face. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years lived hard. In the bully's mind, the story was already written: a weak dad, a public humiliation, a quick thrill before moving on with his day. What he didn't see was the way Daniel's jaw tightened just a fraction, the way his shoulders settled, muscle memory quietly waking up beneath the surface, or the way his daughter's small hand clutched the back of his jacket, trusting him completely. When the slap came, it wasn't wild or frantic, it was deliberate, sharp, meant to sting more than injure, and it landed with humiliating precision across Daniel's face. For a split second, the world narrowed to sound and sensation, the echo ringing in his ears, the heat blooming on his cheek, and somewhere deep inside him, something ancient and dangerous stirred, something trained to respond with overwhelming force. But instead of striking back, instead of moving the way his body had been taught to move for years in places far from this cozy cafe, Daniel did something that confused everyone watching. He took a slow breath, reached back, and gently pulled his daughter against his leg, his hand resting protectively on her head as if to remind her, and himself, that she was the reason he was standing still. The cafe erupted into whispers. Chairs scraping, someone gasping, and the bully looked almost disappointed that Daniel hadn't swung back. "That's what I thought," he said, satisfied, turning as if the moment was already over. But Daniel spoke then, quietly, his voice low and even, carrying just enough weight to make the bully pause. "You're having a bad day," he said, not accusing, not threatening, just stating it like a fact. "And you think hurting someone in front of his kid will fix it? It won't." The words weren't dramatic, but there was something in the way he said them that made the bully's smile falter. Something old and unmovable beneath the calm. Daniel didn't know that half the cafe was holding its breath, watching this strange choice unfold, kindness standing where rage was expected, restraint where retaliation should have been. He didn't know that in a few minutes, everything about this moment would unravel in ways no one could have predicted, revealing truths buried under years of silence and sacrifice. Right now, all he knew was that his daughter was trembling slightly against him, and that no matter what this man thought of him, no matter what anyone in this room assumed, he would not let violence be the lesson she learned today. And as the bully slowly turned back around, irritation flaring into something darker, the tension stretching thin enough to snap, Daniel felt the full weight of his past press against his present. The soldier he had been, standing shoulder to shoulder with the father he had become, both waiting to see which one the world would force to step forward next. The bully turned back fully now, his face tightening with the kind of anger that comes when dominance doesn't land the way it's supposed to. And he took a step closer, invading Daniel's space, clearly expecting fear or at least submission, but finding neither, only a quiet stillness that unsettled him more than any shouted insult could have. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he sneered, voice raised just enough for the entire cafe to hear, feeding on the attention, the eyes locked on him, the moment bending around his ego. "You're just teaching your kid how to be weak." The word hung in the air like poison, and Daniel felt it strike somewhere deeper than the slap. Because weakness was a word that haunted him in ways no one here could imagine. For a heartbeat, Daniel's mind drifted somewhere else entirely, to dusty villages under foreign skies, to the low hum of helicopters cutting through night air, to moments where weakness meant death and hesitation meant never coming home. He remembered the faces of men who trusted him with their lives. The weight of responsibility that pressed into his spine every time he stepped forward and said, "Follow me." He remembered the cost of violence, the way it carved itself into you and never quite left, no matter how many years passed. And standing there in that cafe, his cheeks still burning, his daughter clinging to him, he knew with absolute clarity that true strength wasn't what the bully thought it was. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, it was restraint. Forged through pain and chosen again and again when every instinct screamed otherwise. He knelt slowly, lowering himself to his daughter's level, his back still to the bully, an act that looked vulnerable but was anything but. "Hey," he murmured softly, brushing her hair back from her eyes, his thumb wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Remember what we talked about? About people who are hurting inside, sometimes acting mean on the outside." She nodded, biting her lip, trusting him with the whole of her small heart. "This is one of those moments," he said gently, his voice a steady anchor in the storm around them. "You stay right here, okay?" She nodded again, and when he stood, something in his posture had changed, subtle but undeniable, like a switch had been flipped deep within. The bully scoffed, emboldened by what he thought was surrender. "That's right, keep talking," he said, shoving Daniel lightly in the chest, not hard enough to cause harm, but hard enough to assert power. The cafe owner shouted for them to take it outside, someone else reached for their phone, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation, the kind that precedes either disaster or revelation. Daniel took the shove without moving his feet, his balance effortless, eyes steady. And for the first time, the bully noticed it, the way Daniel didn't sway, didn't stumble, didn't even tense the way untrained bodies do. Confusion flickered across his face just for a moment. "You really don't want to do this?" Daniel said quietly, not as a threat but as a statement of fact, his voice so calm it cut through the noise like a blade. There was no anger in it, no ego, only certainty. The bully laughed again, but it was forced now, brittle at the edges. "Or what?" he challenged. "You gonna cry?" And that's when fate or irony, or something like justice, decided to step in. The cafe door opened, and a man in plain clothes stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room with the practiced awareness of someone who had spent a lifetime reading danger. His gaze landed on Daniel, and his expression changed instantly, shock and recognition colliding in a way that made him stop mid-step. "Sir," the man said, his voice carrying across the room before he could stop himself. Daniel's eyes flicked to him, and for a split second, the years fell away. They knew each other, not casually, not socially. They had blood on the same ground, trusted each other with secrets that never made it into official reports. Daniel's jaw tightened, a silent warning, but it was too late. The bully turned, irritated, ready to snap at the interruption. "What?" he barked, But the man ignored him completely, eyes still locked on Daniel with something dangerously close to reverence. "I thought you were dead," the man said quietly, awe creeping into his tone despite himself. The room seemed to shrink, the words echoing way that made people lean in, curiosity ignited like dry tinder. The bully frowned, looking between them. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but no one was looking at him anymore. Daniel exhaled slowly, the past he'd buried clawing its way into the present. "Not here," he said under his breath, but the man shook his head, emotion overriding discretion. "You saved my life," he said, louder now, his voice trembling, more than once. Whispers rippled through the cafe like a wave, the story shifting shape in real time as assumptions crumbled. The bully's smirk faded, replaced by unease. "Saved your life from what?" he scoffed, though the confidence was draining from his voice. The man finally looked at him then, really looked at him. And there was something in his eyes that made the bully take a half-step back without realizing it. "From people who don't hesitate," he said simply. "From places you wouldn't last 5 minutes." Silence followed, thick and heavy, and Daniel closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing himself, because he knew there was no going back now. He opened them again, meeting the bully's gaze, and for the first time, he let a glimpse of his true self surface, not in anger, but in truth. "I don't want trouble," he said, his voice carrying authority that no slap could erase. "I came here for pancakes with my kid." The contrast was almost unbearable. The simplicity of the statement against the weight of what was being revealed. And it hit the bully harder than any punch ever could have. His eyes dropped, darted around the room, suddenly aware of how small he felt, how exposed, how wrong he had been. The cafe was silent now, everyone waiting, the moment stretched taut. And Daniel knew that what happened next would define more than just this morning. It would show his daughter, and everyone watching, what strength really looked like when the past and present collide. The bully swallowed hard, the sound louder than he probably intended in the silence that had settled over the cafe, and for the first time since he'd walked in, he looked uncertain. His posture no longer expansive but guarded, his shoulders tightening as if he suddenly realized he'd stepped into a story where he was no longer in control. Daniel could see the shift happening in real time, the slow collapse of bravado into something closer to fear, and it stirred a strange mix of emotions in him, not satisfaction, not triumph, but a quiet sadness, because he recognized that look too well. It was the look of a man confronting the consequences of his own unchecked anger. The moment when the mask cracks and there's nothing underneath but insecurity. "I didn't know," the bully muttered, though it sounded less like an apology and more like a reflex. Something to say when the ground beneath you starts to give way. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He turned instead to his daughter, who was watching everything with wide, serious eyes. Absorbing the tension in ways children always do, even when adults pretend they don't notice. He crouched down again, meeting her gaze, his expression softening as if the entire room had faded away. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded, then hesitated, her small voice barely audible. Why was he mean? The question cut through Daniel more sharply than the slap ever could, because it carried innocence and curiosity, not judgment. "Sometimes," Daniel said slowly, choosing his words with care, "people carry a lot of pain inside them, and instead of fixing it, they throw it at others." He glanced briefly at the bully, who flinched at being seen so clearly. "That doesn't make it right," Daniel continued. "But it reminds us that we don't have to become like them." His daughter thought about this, then nodded again, satisfied in the way only children can be when given an honest answer. Daniel stood, feeling the weight in his chest ease just a little, because this moment, mattered more than any confrontation ever could. The man who recognized him stepped forward hesitantly, his voice low, respectful. "Sir, if you want I can call someone. Security, police." The suggestion hung there, an easy out, a chance for retribution, for consequences that would feel justified. Daniel looked at the bully, really looked at him now, saw not a villain, but a broken man who made a terrible choice in a fleeting moment of arrogance. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "that won't help today." The bully's eyes snapped up, disbelief flickering across his face. "Why?" he asked, the word escaping before he could stop it. Daniel answered honestly. "Because I don't want my daughter to think strength is about ruining someone when you finally have the upper hand." The words landed heavy, not just on the bully, but on everyone listening. Because they challenged something deep and uncomfortable. The bully's face flushed, shame creeping in now that the adrenaline had drained away. He glanced around the cafe, at the people watching him not with fear, but with quiet judgment, and for the first time, he seemed to feel the full weight of what he'd done. "I shouldn't have," he said, the sentence unfinished. Raw. "I'm sorry. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real." Daniel nodded once, accepting the apology without fanfare, without superiority. "Don't do it again," he said simply. The bully nodded quickly, almost gratefully, backing away as if eager to escape the version of himself that had been exposed. When he turned and left the cafe, the door closing softly behind him, there was no applause, no cheering, just a collective exhale, the room slowly returning to life, conversations restarting in hushed tones, the smell of coffee filling the space again like a gentle reset. The cafe owner approached, offering to comp the meal, his voice thick with emotion, but Daniel declined with a small smile. "Just pancakes," he said. "That's all we came for." He returned to the table with his daughter, lifting her into the chair, and when the pancakes arrived, warm and golden, she grinned as if the world had righted itself. As they ate, Daniel felt the man across the room watching him, the one who knew his past, and eventually he came over quietly. "You haven't changed," the man said, admiration clear in his eyes. Daniel shook his head. "I have," he replied softly. "I just learned what was worth fighting for." As they left the K later, sunlight sullying across the sidewalk, Daniel held his daughter's hand, feeling her squeeze his fingers, grounding him in the present. He knew the legend, the soldier, the Delta Force operator, that man would always be part of him, etched into his bones by experience and sacrifice. But today, in a small cafe with pancakes and kindness and restraint, he had shown his daughter something far more powerful than any combat story ever could. That true strength is the ability to choose compassion when the world expects violence, to protect without destroying, and to walk away knowing you've taught the right lesson, not just to your child, but to yourself. And somewhere behind them, a bully walked away changed, not by fear, but by mercy, carrying a moment he would never forget. The day he struck a quiet single dad, only to learn that the strongest people in the room are often the ones who refuse to prove it.